Okay, let's dive right into this. When we think of the ancient Greek gods, our minds usually jump straight to those serene marble statues, right? We picture this realm of infinite wisdom and divine perfection. But if you actually look at the ancient texts, they paint a vastly different, frankly, terrifying picture. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to explore a divine dynasty built not on peace and harmony, but on deep-seated fear, violent castration, and literal cannibalism. We are looking at the epic saga of Cronus, Zeus, and the Titanomachy, which is, simply put, the ultimate cosmic war for the universe.
To really understand this story, we have to start at the beginning, with a dying curse from Uranus, the literal embodiment of the sky. See, Uranus was a tyrant. He imprisoned his own monstrous children deep within the earth, which caused their mother, Gaia, absolutely immense pain. Desperate, Gaia actually forged an adamantine sickle, and she gave it to her youngest Titan son, Cronus, who used it to ambush and violently unman his own father. But just as Uranus's reign ended in a single brutal stroke, he hissed this horrifying dying prophecy at Cronus. And this very curse, this exact moment, establishes the central gnawing paranoia that drives this entire cosmic thriller. And we have to remember the kind of universe they inhabited. Before the Titans even existed, there was chaos. And the ancient Greeks imagined this origin not as just some empty floating space, but as a yawning void, like a primal, insatiable hunger. From this came Gaia, whose womb essentially became a prison for her children until Cronus' rebellion. And man, that rebellion was bloody. When Cronus struck Uranus, the blood that spilled onto the earth literally gave birth to furies and giants. And where the severed parts struck the churning sea, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty itself, was born from an act of horrific mutilation. So Cronus takes the throne of the cosmos, but the shadow of chaos and his father's curse is just looming incredibly large over everything.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the staggering contrast between the old regime and the new one that would eventually follow. Once Cronus gained power, he ruled through absolute authoritarian paranoia. His reign was entirely marked by isolation, stagnation, and fear. He knew exactly how power could be taken away, right? He just did it. So he trusted absolutely no one. Compare that to the future rule of his son, Zeus, which would be defined by strategic leadership, building alliances, and crucial adaptability. The real tragedy of Cronus is that he completely stopped ruling the present because he was entirely consumed by fighting the future.
Think about what that paranoia does to a person. Every single time his wife Rhea gave birth, that prophecy of his downfall just echoed in his mind. So he devised a monstrous solution: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. As each child was born, Cronus didn't kill them in some fit of chaotic rage. No, it's actually worse. He calmly and deliberately swallowed them whole. He firmly believed that if his children never grew up, time itself would essentially be trapped inside his body. He made himself a living tomb just to freeze time and prevent his inevitable overthrow. But, a mother's grief can only be pushed so far before it curdles into this unbreakable iron resolve. Having stared at 5 empty cradles, Rhea sought help from Gaia and pulled off a wildly desperate deception. She fled to a hidden cave on the island of Crete so she could give birth to her 6th child, Zeus, in total, absolute secrecy. Then she wrapped a simple stone in swaddling clothes and actually handed it to her husband. And Kronos, who was apparently not a very attentive eater, swallowed the rock whole without a second glance. This right here is the first real crack in his absolute reign. His sheer obsession with control finally made him careless.
So, with Cronus completely fooled, Zeus's upbringing was vastly different from the dark, terrifying imprisonment of his siblings. He was nourished by the milk of the divine goat, Almathea. And to protect him, warrior Ceratus constantly clashed their shields and weapons together just to drown out the sounds of his crying, perfectly keeping his existence hidden from his paranoid father up above. Being raised as a fugitive, far away from the isolated, frozen world of Cronus, Zeus learned something absolutely vital. Brute strength without timing is just a weakness. He learned patience. He learned how to move with time, which perfectly prepared him to dismantle a kingdom that was built entirely on terror. So the crucial point is this intensely visceral moment where the trapped future finally bursts free from the past. When Zeus came of age, he didn't just charge in swinging a sword. He used strategy. He disguised himself as a humble cupbearer, and with the help of the goddess Metis, he slipped his father a powerful potion. The result? Cronus convulsed and violently vomited up the stone, followed by the 5 siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon.
who were all alive, fully grown, and, as you can imagine, absolutely furious. The belly prison was broken, and these 6 gods were now totally ready to make war. But here's the thing. Zeus knew that he and his siblings alone weren't enough to defeat the deeply entrenched power of the Titans. He needed an overwhelming force, and to get it, he had to venture into Tartarus. Now, this isn't just the underworld of the dead. We're talking about the deepest, darkest, cosmic abyss beneath Hades itself, ringed by impenetrable iron walls. It was the ultimate maximum security prison where Uranus and later Cronus had buried the old, terrifying monsters of the universe. Zeus went down into this horrifying primordial abyss specifically to break the chains of his father's discarded horrors. And this brilliantly illustrates how Zeus weaponized the very beings his father tried so hard to erase. He freed the Cyclopes, Argos, Steripes, and Brontes, who were these master metalsmiths. In sheer gratitude, they forged the legendary arsenal of the Olympians, the trident for Poseidon, the helm of darkness for Hades, and, of course, the iconic thunderbolt for Zeus. He also freed the Hecatoncheires, these towering giants with 100 hands and 50 heads who brought unparalleled, literally 100-handed destruction to the battlefield. Zeus effectively turned his father's suppressed force into his own greatest advantage. Armed, united, and furious, the Olympians finally faced the Titans. This was the Titanomachy, a devastating 10-year cosmic war for ownership of the universe itself. The Titans were holding down Mount Othryus, while the Olympians took Mount Olympus. And guys, this was an apocalyptic, brutally violent conflict. The ancient texts describe literal mountains being ripped up by their roots and hurled across the sky like stones. The earth groaned in agony, the sea boiled, and the whole of creation shook beneath the fury of a family that was violently at war with itself. But what actually turned the tide during those 10 agonizing years? Surprisingly, it wasn't just thunderbolts and giants. It was politics. Zeus's real power came from building incredibly strategic alliances. He put out the word, promising that anyone who joined his side would keep or even gain divine honors. Styx was the first to answer that call, bringing her incredibly powerful children, Nike, Zeus, Kratos, and Bia, right to Zeus's side. Even titans like Prometheus and Themis defected because they saw the rigid stagnation of Cronus's rule. Now, sure, there were betrayals, like the messenger Ark fleeing to the Titans, but Zeus's overall embrace of adaptability and cooperation is what ultimately shattered the isolated authoritarianism of the old regime. Finally, the old order just completely collapsed under the crushing weight of the new. And the aftermath of the Titanomachy was swift, and it was dramatic. The defeated Titans were cast down into the very same pit of Tartarus where they had once imprisoned others, and Zeus assigned the 100-handed Hecatoncheires as their eternal guards. Atlas, who was the Titan's second in command, was given this agonizing legendary punishment of holding up the vault of the sky forever. And Arche, the traitor, stripped of her wings and thrown straight into the abyss. The wheel of the family's cruelty had essentially turned once more. With the Titans fully defeated, the victors set about dividing up the spoils. The universe was carved up by lot among the 3 brothers. Zeus took dominion over the sky and the air, cementing his place as the king of the gods. Poseidon claimed the sea and all of its waters, and Hades took the underworld, the sprawling realm of the dead. The earth itself was left as a sort of common domain for all of them to interact with. And this massive division officially founded the Olympian era, finally bringing a new structure to the cosmos. But come on, this is Greek mythology we're talking about, right? Peace is rarely ever permanent. Despite their grand victory and their shiny new Mount Olympus, there was a dark, cyclical twist to this whole saga. The curse was never broken, it was only inherited. Soon after taking power, Zeus received a terrifying prophecy that a child born of his first wife, the goddess Metis, would one day overthrow him. Terrified of losing his hard-won throne, Zeus did the unthinkable. He swallowed Metis whole. The son had literally become the father. He repeated the exact, horrifying crime of Cronus just to preserve his own power. Which brings us to a really profound philosophical question to ponder. Was Cronus actually defeated by destiny, or was he defeated by his own fear? I mean, prophecies in these myths are absolute, sure, but look at his actions. His obsession with freezing time, his total refusal to share power, devouring his own legacy, that is exactly what alienated his wife. That's what created his enemies in the first place. By trying to consume the future to prevent his downfall, he actually built the very mechanisms that guaranteed his inevitable, violent collapse. Ultimately, what you should take away from this explainer is that the story of the Titanomachy is the psychological tragedy of control. Power gained through fear can never, ever feel secure. Cronus teaches us that resisting change and trying to rule by pure terror always leads to ruin, because control taken too far inevitably becomes collapse. The tighter you grip power, the more fragile it actually becomes. And as we see Zeus inheriting that exact same paranoia, it leaves us with one final provocative thought. If even the all-powerful gods are trapped in endless cycles of their own fear, can anyone who rules by fear ever truly be free?